Hey, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to due to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, who all learned this truth from the well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000 and the rest of the 1/3, the large multitude. Until I say shalom. Come to you back with another lesson through the Spirit. Now I'm entitled this one: The prophets were always persecuted. And now in this modern day age, here in 2025, especially here in America, that great persecution, which the prophets of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai are already being persecuted, but it's going to get to the point where we'll be taken off the street corners. Anything that we say against the system, against the small hats, the anti-S word, and even our own people, the nation of Israel, that comprised of the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, they persecute us just as much as this devil Esau Edom, the white man, because our people have always persecuted the prophets from way back, from the time of ancient prophets, before, up until this point, even during the time of Yahushai. Yahushai had a lot of followers, but he had a lot of his own people come up against him, which ultimately our own people are the ones who gave up Yahushai, to the Romans, and that's ultimately why the southern kingdom, comprised of the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, which, the so-called Negroes, that's why the reason why they're catching so much hell, because they've always persecuted the prophets, but really all the 12 tribes, including the northern kingdom. Because when you don't like the message that somebody's coming with, then you're going to come against them. You're going to try to put your hands on them, which back in the day, a lot of prophets did get put to death, by our own people. So it's nothing new in this modern day age. If it was up to Jake, they would already, put the prophets to death. But ultimately, that Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai has that hedge of protection. And some prophets, some men of the Lord will get caught up, and have to be martyrs for the testimony of Yahushai. But, it's not going to be like the prophets of old, which a lot of them did get put to death. But this time around, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is going to raise that standard. He's going to give spiritual power to some of his elect, to be kept from all the upcoming calamities that are about to come upon the planet Earth. That's why Esau Edom, the white man, he really hasn't came down with that great wrath, to the point where he's going to come down with the troops, military, the robot dogs, whatever weapons that Esau Edom has stored up. For this time being, we know that ultimately when he pulls that trigger, when he makes that move, then Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is going to raise that standard. That's why he hasn't really came down, because he's scared. He knows that Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is going to protect his elect and lift that standard up, because he's really scared. That's why he really hasn't made that move yet, but he has a short time, so he has to get his system up and running, try to get everybody micro-seated, which we know he's not going to get to the elect. He'll get to the 2/3 in each heathens, but ultimately the elect will be kept. Even during the time of great persecution, which is about to take place very soon, because this devil Esau Edom, the white man, he's looking for that excuse to get the Hebrew Israelites roped up with the rest of these T-ism movements, which he's looking for any excuse, looking for a reason to come down on the Hebrew Israelites. That's why now you got these Muslims out there with mics, on the corners, shouting and yapping, passing the corner to the next speaker. Well, that's tacky as all hell. We know what he's trying to do. He's trying to rope up the Hebrew Israelites with the rest of these T groups. You can't say that word, but says Matthew chapter 5 and verse 10, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So ultimately, we know that we're being persecuted for having the testimony of Yahushua. We're not out here being persecuted like these criminals, these 2/3, which they're going to be persecuted as well, because Esau, Edom, he's going to come down on the whole nation of Israel. And even his own people, he's going to do a lot of collateral damage to try to get to the elect, but we know he's not going to get to all the elect. Yes, some elect might get caught up and have to be martyrs for the testimony of Yahushua, but ultimately, we know that he's not going to get all the elect. He's only going to get so many, before that standard gets raised up, and the elect will be able to protect themselves through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shemiel Shai. And even those of the elect that do put their lives down to be martyrs for the testimony of Yahweh Shai, they're going to be raised up first. Verse 11, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And even right now, our own people who know that they're Israelites, these other Israelite camps, calling the apostles and elders on down, of Great Millstone grapists, because they were bringing out, the Levitical law, but yet Jake can't get with it. They rather scoff and mock, talk shit about the men and the prophets of Yahweh Shemiel Shai instead of taking heed. But that's going to lead to the destruction, bearing false witness against the true servants of Yahweh Shemiel Shai. But that's what comes with it. Just like Yahweh Shai was being lied on, by his own people. Here he was numbered against numbered with the transgressors. Barabbas, he was an actual murderer. He was an actual criminal. But yet here's, Yahweh Shai, completely blameless. Did nothing wrong. But yet, he had to go through that, and just like Yahweh Shai went through that, we're gonna have to go through that as well. You got to bear that cross. Verse 12, rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. So all the prophets of old that were persecuted from the time of Elijah. During that time period, he had the evil ass so-called queen Jezebel, trying to do away with the prophets. Then during the time of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, our wicked ass people, same shit, try to get the prophets, put to death. And even during the time of Yahweh Shai, the disciples, being heavily persecuted by the Edomites, the Roman Empire, up to the point where all the disciples, the 12 disciples of Yahweh Shai, not including Judas, the one who replaced him. I think it's Mattathias or Bartholomew, Salakia, if I don't mention the right name. But, majority of the disciples that later became apostles, they had to experience martyrdom. They had to experience death ultimately for the testimony of Yahweh Shai, but they were willing to take that death because they knew, they believed in the death, burial, and resurrection, and they knew during the latter days they were going to be raised up to again prophesy against this wicked ass revived Roman Empire. It was only one of the disciples of Yahweh Shai that didn't get put to death, but he still had to suffer that imprisonment, in the island of Patmos, where he got all the revelations, through the angel. This is John chapter 15 and verse 18. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Verse 19, if you were of the world would love his own. But because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. And ultimately, Yahweh Shai was hated by 2/3 of wicked ass Jake, that gave him up to the Romans. A lot of Jake here in this modern day age, they're gonna do the same thing. even our own family members or so-called friends that we had in the world. When the devil comes down with that great wrath, and he gets a lot of people roped up, they're gonna offer a solution. Like, if you turn in, if you turn your, this family member that has, been out there on the highways and byways prophesying the destruction of America, then we'll spare you, but ultimately we know that Esau, Edom, is full of shit. He's just going to use a lot of our family members, friends that we had in the world, co-workers against us, ultimately because they're not part of the elect. The wicked ass of our people, they hate the servants of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai because of the message we come with. It condemns their behavior. It condemns this world, and they don't like that. They don't like being called out on their bullshit. They don't like to be held accountable. That's ultimately why they hate the message of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, because it's telling them to get right, before all hell breaks loose and you have no hedge of protection. Verse 20, remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will also keep yours also. So the servant isn't greater than his Lord, Yahushua. Yahushua was being persecuted. He was hated by a lot of his own people. But also, the Romans. But yet our own wicked ass people, the nation of Israel, have always been the main ones. Except for the remnant, the elect, they have always came up against the prophets of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua because they don't like the message that we come with. Telling our people to get right, to repent. But yet here they are, fucking stiff-necked as all hell, rebellious, refusing to take heed, refusing to take rebuke. But ultimately, that's going to lead to their destruction, to be an example of how not to behave, how not to conduct yourself. A lot of Jake is going to think that they're doing, a favor, but they're really doing themselves a disservice, when they start providing information of where the prophets of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai are in this modern day. Verse 21, but all these things will they do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent me. So a majority of our people, they claim to know God and Jesus Christ, but they don't really know Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. They don't really know what they stand for and what their true will is here upon the planet Earth. Their will is to destroy America. Their will is to bring this devil Esau, Edom down. And our people aren't with that. They want this wicked ass place to continue on, but that's ultimately why they're going to be destroyed, because they're not okay. They don't want to get with the program. So Yahweh Bashim Yahushai is just going to have to do away, with these wicked ass heathen, and he's going to have to put the two thirds to death. And they will be brought back in the kingdom, but they're going to have to suffer that death, that second death, that lake of fire. We're not getting with their program for persecuting the prophets of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, for talking shit, scoffing and mocking. They're going to have to be held accountable. Any idle word, especially Jake, when they're walking by on the highways and byways, driving by, in their mindset, they're talking shit. But all those words that they're just thinking about, they're going to have to be held accountable. They're going to have to answer for all the shit and all the stuff that they've done to the prophets of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. This is 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 11. Persecutions, afflictions, which came unto me at Antioch, at Iconium and Lystra, war persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord delivered me. So out of all the persecutions that Paul was going through, ultimately he was delivered. By having faith and trusting in Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. That's why Jake, they can't get with the program, because they don't have no faith. They can't see the vision of America being destroyed. They can't see how the elect will be beamed up through the way of the chariots. They don't have that kind. A lot of Jake don't have faith at all, these 230. That's ultimately why they're going to be destroyed, because they can't see it, before it happens. And that's another reason why they don't want to come to the truth, because now they know that if they, come into the truth, then they're going to be persecuted. Right now, a lot of Jake is cool, being an Israelite, these other camps looking cute, They got the fringes on at work. They got the fringes on in public, looking cute. But when this devil comes down with the great wrath and then starts putting Jake to death, they're going to put up their garment. They're going to hide their Bible. They're going to say they were never part of the Israelite movement. But ultimately, if you heard about the Israelites, this devil Esau Edom, the white man, he already has your IP address. He already knows what you know. And he's going to come down with that great wrath regardless. If you were part of this camp or you were part of that camp. That's why a lot of Jake, in these other Israelite camps, they think because they're not teaching the 100% truth, they're not teaching the proper breakdown of the MOTB, that they're not teaching their congregation of Jacob's trouble, that they're not teaching Esau Edom, and what his end is going to be and how this current kingdom is falling, then Esau Edom's not going to come down on him as hard. But ultimately, Esau Edom, the white man, he's going to rope up all the Israelite camps into one. It doesn't matter if you were teaching this or you were teaching that. No, you're part of the nation of Israel. Esau Edom, he wants to put you to death. Verse 12, yeah, and all that will live godly, and Hamashiach Yahweh Shai shall suffer persecution. And even right now, only the true servants of Yahweh Shai are being persecuted. Not just by our own people, but also by these agents. You got Bocab Malone, you got all these other Christian apologists, these anti-Hamashiachs, coming up to the camps and talking shit, trying to start trouble. But yet you got all these other Israelite camps that are, being, loved by their own people. They got a large following. Ultimately, that's how Yahweh Shai is not dealing with them, because they're not preaching about prophecy. They're not teaching about Yahweh Shai. No, they're teaching about exalting themselves, keep the laws 100%. Ultimately, that's how Yahweh Shai is not really dealing with them. Because what's the infamous camp that everybody tries to come up against? Calling them rapists, calling them bums, the bum camp. It's the apostles and elders of Great Millstone on down. And even after all those decades of being persecuted, people talking down on them, of our apostles and elders, elder bishops on down, they're still enduring. It is Isaiah 59 and verse 15. Yet truth faileth, and he that departed from evil maketh himself a prey. And the Lord Yahweh Shai saw it, and it displeased him that there were no judgment. So when you come out of the world, you put off the old world, you start condemning this wicked ass world, you start condemning the behavior of 2/3 of our own people, and all the wickedness that they're doing, that makes yourself a target. Because now, you may be at the family cookout, like all they got is hot dogs and pork ribs, and then you tell your family, I don't eat that shit, I don't eat pork. They got shrimp, crab, lobster, you tell them you don't eat that. You stop going to family holidays, you stop going to Thanksgiving dinners, you stop going to Christmas parties and 4th of July and all these pagan holidays that our people love to celebrate. That makes you a target. Now they're looking at you sideways like something's wrong with you. Like you got 3 heads, but yet here they are serving these false gods and these false idols, worshiping these pagan ass holidays, worshiping their women, just completely going to hell off. So now you're putting that target on your back, because now you're separating yourself from the world. Which that word holy, which means separate. And we were always meant to be a holy nation from the rest of these heathens. That's what separated us from these other heathen nations with the law, statutes, and commandments. But yet Jake, they want to join in with the heathen. They rather worship their gods, celebrate their holidays, because it lets them do wickedness. And that's why they persecute the prophets of Yahweh Shai so hard, because now, it don't feel good for them to get rebuked and telling them to get right. They want to continue to keep on doing wickedness. This is Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Yeah, and ultimately, we're almost at that time period, where this devil he's going to come down with that great wrath. He's going to put an end to the Hebrew Israelite movements, us actually being out there on the highways and byways. He's going to clip the internet, But ultimately, we know when our apostles and elders and the leadership make that call, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shemel Shai to not go out anymore. That's it. Now it's going to be the time of judgment. The time of Esau, Edom, the white man coming down with that great wrath. And you're going to have a lot of bugged out Israelite camps out there still prophesying while Jacob's trouble is going on, while martial law is going on. But that's not really prophesying, because now it's happening. The word prophesy means to say before, not to say while it's happening. Which that's what a lot of Jake is going to try to do. But that's going to lead a lot of Jake to get put to death. At that time and period, the true servants of Yahweh Shemel Shai, the true men of the Lord, will be hidden. Yes, some of us might get caught up, and get put in these detention centers, and ultimately it's to have our faith tested. But even if we have to go under that guillotine and lose our life, ultimately we endure to the end. Even if we have to be a martyr and go under that guillotine, ultimately we didn't renounce our faith like a lot of Jake is gonna do in that day. When they get caught up, they're gonna get scared, and they're gonna renounce their faith, be like, nah, I don't believe in that anymore. Ultimately, we know the elect isn't gonna do that, even if we have to lay our lives down for Yahweh Shai. That's all part of the persecution. But that's pretty much the point. Pray this is edifying to the elect. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakodash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who all in this truth from the well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000, the rest of them one third, the large multitude. Until I say shalom.